Hey guys, welcome back to 247 DIY. Today we're going to be diving back into the WRX, and hopefully by the end of this video we're going to start it up for the first time in over a year, so stay tuned. Alright guys, so like I pointed out in a previous video, the gasket on the water pump over time just failed for some reason. It's leaking coolant down onto the header. So the whole project we're going to be tackling today is we're just going to do a whole new timing belt on here with tensioner, pulleys, water pump, everything. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and drain the radiator and get the radiator out. Now I've already removed the fans off the front of this when I took the timing cover off to see where this leak was coming from. And if you have the original cooling configuration, you're also going to have a metal line that comes across the front here down to the factory coolant reservoir over here. I've moved mine over here, so I've deleted that metal pipe, and so there's one less hose that needs to be disconnected, which would be over here. Alright, so now that the radiator is out of the way, the first thing we need to do before we go ahead and start pulling this timing belt off is you have to line up all of your timing marks on your 4 cam pulleys as well as your crank sprocket. So what I've done is I've just thrown the crank bolt back here in the sprocket. We're going to turn this clockwise until the white mark, you'll see in a second because it's actually facing down, until the white mark faces up and lines up with the mark here at the top. And I'll give you close-ups of these to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So you can see here the top mark on the crank sprocket lines up with the indent in the top of the oil pump casing, which I've just highlighted with a little bit of white paint pen. And you can see here the top pulley on the driver's side lines up with the top mark on the plastic timing cover case. And this one's a little hard to see because the angle I had to hold the phone at, but there's another timing mark that faces the driver's side frame rail, and you can see that lines up with the mark on the timing case as well. And you can see the double marks here. They're intended to line directly up. You can see that they don't. But onto the passenger side of the motor, again, same thing, just your 2 timing marks that line up with each other with the timing cover there. Another one that's hard to see, but it's exactly the same as the other side. And our double marks line up on both of these pulleys as well. Now we can go ahead and start some of the disassembly. So the first thing we're going to do is pull off the idlers and other pulleys that we're going to be replacing. So you got an idler down here, an idler up here, you have your hydraulic tensioner, a sprocket here, and a small idler over here. Now when you take your belt off, the cam gears over on this side, they may turn and rotate out of place. That's fine. We can go ahead and fix that in a minute. Luckily mine didn't. And you can see all the nasty coolant mess here that this leaking seal has been causing over time. We're going to get this thermostat elbow off of here. It's just 2 10mm nuts. And before we go ahead and start unbolting this water pump, we need to disconnect these 2 rubber hoses here as well as this connection over here. And then we need to go ahead and remove the 6 10mm bolts that hold this water pump on. We got one here, 2, 3, 4, 5 is recessed down into here, and the 6th one is just up over here from above the top outlet. Alright guys, so I don't know if I have reason to be concerned or not. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. We're just going to have to move forward. But I'm not entirely sure that this water pump hasn't been replaced before. I don't know if in the footage of me taking it off you could see, but this bolt in particular was giving me some trouble. There wasn't enough room for me to actually get the socket all the way on there. It was making contact with the housing here. I did manage to get it on just enough to break it free. And this probably isn't going to focus quite well enough, but I noticed, like, I can see sort of the fresh rounding that I put on there from not having the socket on there all the way, but to me it looks like there's old rounding on there. And you can also see inside of the housing here, there's a little ring in there from a tool that was rubbing up against, and I know my socket didn't rub up enough to put a gouge in the housing there. I was fairly confident that this was all original stuff here, and the only other explanation would be that that got done when the car was originally assembled, which I guess may happen if it's just being thrown together quickly on an assembly line. But I really don't know what's going on. It may be why we have such a nasty leak here. This may just be a crappy aftermarket unit. I'm gonna have to look for some markings and see what's going on. I don't really know. So I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed and hope that this hasn't been messed with before and nobody's been in here, because there was a previous owner on this car, but I really didn't think that this had been messed with. I'm gonna go ahead and just hope that that's markings from when this was assembled and that bolt was just never quite aligned right, because now that it's out, I can get my socket in there no problem. It doesn't make contact. But like I said, we're just gonna move forward. It's nothing I can do about it now. It's just kind of a big question mark, and it just gives me a little bit of pause wondering if someone has been in here before. Now moving forward from here, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start replacing a lot of what we took off. Now for that little bit of cooling pipe that comes over from your oil cooler onto your water pump, all of the hoses and pipes, we've got all new OEM stuff here to replace the crusty old stuff. As well as a new water pump here, and that's all part of a kit. You can see all that right back here. There's some conjecture over whether a lot of the newer replacement stuff that comes from China or other places is going to be reliable. So if you're concerned about that, and it was something that I felt was worth a few more dollars on top of, you know, what a cheaper kit would be, you can go to fastwrx.com. They have this kit ready to go in stock, and these are all OE equivalent quality Japanese made parts. They shouldn't give you any issues for miles to come. Alright guys, so I've gone ahead and I've cleaned up what I could of all of the dried up coolant that's built up. There's actually a whole bunch just loaded up in this corner over here. It was pretty gross. It was all kind of jelly consistency. And I've gone ahead and cleaned up the face, the gasket surface here. When we go ahead and install the water pump, I like to just take it, put it on there, and just start 2 of your bolts on there like that to hold it in place as you mount it on there. But before I go ahead and get too far ahead of myself, a good kit, if you're getting a quality kit, is going to come with a new rubber seat. This isn't super critical. This is more just kind of a dust seal here. We need to throw that in on the side. Then we're ready to go ahead and install the water pump. Alright guys, well it's in. Let me tell you what a huge pain in the butt that was. I don't know if it was just me specifically doing it this time, or if that's normally a big issue on these EJ205s. But I could get these 2 lined up and threaded, but none of the rest wanted to line up. I had this thing on, off, really moving it around before I could get all 6 of the bolts threaded and hand tightened down here. So these get tightened to 9 foot-pounds. My foot-pound torque wrench doesn't go that low, so that converts to 108 inch-pounds. And lastly, we're going to go ahead and install our new thermostat, and I picked up a new elbow for the thermostat outlet. So you may have to install your rubber gasket around the outside here. The one I bought has the gasket on it already. When you go to like a Subaru parts website, you can either purchase just the thermostat or you can buy it with the gasket included. And when this goes on, you're going to have your little bleeder valve up here that just needs to point straight up. And one other thing I noticed when I was planning this project out is I noticed that these seats that the radiator sits on are pretty nasty and rusted, and you can get those as a bolt-in replacement part. So let's go ahead and get those swapped out. And here's just a comparison of the replacement ones. I also went and got new rubber for these as well, so let's throw these in. So now we're going to start reinstalling our pulleys. We're just going to throw these on hand tight to start off with. We're going to leave that bottom one off for now. So now we need to make sure our cam gears are all lined up again. They may have moved during this process, especially when you're taking the belt off. These ones over here are easy. They just move freely, so you can just hand align those, no problem. But then on this side, there's a lot of resistance behind these ones, so you're going to need an Allen key. And what I had mentioned before actually happened to me. I was kind of just messing around with these and I wanted to move it just a hair, and then it popped over this way. So again, these only go clockwise if you need to move them, but you just put your Allen key in there and you're just going to turn them until the timing marks line back up where they need to be. Okay, so all this is a very simple brace that you can use to lock these gears in place so they can't snap out of place while you're putting your timing belt on. There are expensive versions of these, and then there are cheaper versions of these. Just when you do go to buy them, just check the reviews out. I ended up on this one because it had good reviews. There was a couple I checked out and they just had terrible reviews, so let's throw this on there. Alright, so now we're going to start installing our belt. You always want to make sure that the writing on the belt is able to be read. That means it's going to turn in the proper direction. And we're going to start with this dotted line here to the left of the writing. The dotted line is what's going to go in your crank sprocket. And you're going to have timing lines on this belt every so often. I like to take a paint pen and on the front of the belt, just give them a mark so that when you start slipping the belt on there, you can still see those timing marks easily. So we're going to start by lining up the timing mark here on the top of the crank sprocket. And we're going to come underneath the tensioner, underneath this idler, bringing enough tension over the top of the gear here so that this top timing mark here on the belt lines up with the single line timing mark on this gear here. And also lining our single timing mark up over here. Now these can start to be a little tricky. We didn't increase the gap on the timing guides. There is a timing guide back behind this one, but you're just gonna kind of have to slip it in there until it gets behind that timing guide. And then we're gonna come around the water pump, over our sprocket. Gonna leave that there for a second. We're gonna come over to this side. Again, lining the single line here on the belt up with the single line on the cam gear. And it can be a little tricky to see this one. You kind of just got to get your head down in there as best you can. But also then aligning this single line on the timing belt with the single line facing to the left on this timing gear. And then we're going to install this last idler pulley. We do this by hand so that you can kind of come in at an angle and then get the threads and tighten this on this last little bit, because you have to slip it underneath against the tension of the belt. And we can go ahead and pull the pin on the tensioner to properly tension the belt. And then we're going to torque all the 14mm bolts here down to 29 foot-pounds and the smaller 12mm bolt down to 18 foot-pounds. A very important note that I forgot to mention that caught me by surprise when I went to torque this bolt down, and I'm really hoping there's enough threads left in the block where it doesn't come to bite me. You can see them. I stripped them right out of the head there, or out of the block there. The OEM idler on this is recessed, and generally when you buy these aftermarket ones, and I think these are on the later model EJ 205s, these stick out more. So you need to find a longer bolt to get proper thread engagement. Alright, so it's not the right bolt, but I had this one laying around. It's the same thread pitch, it just has a different head. I really wish I had a cap head style bolt for this, but I don't. It is what it is. But you can see now that they come out to the same length there. I'm probably just going to throw a dab of blue Loctite on here, just for a little bit of peace of mind. It should be fine, but because I'm not using, an OEM piece and we are incorporating a washer now, it does make me a little nervous. So we just ran it through several rotations here. Keep in mind the marks on your belt, they're never going to line up again once you put it on there, but you're just paying attention that every time your crank sprocket here comes back into alignment with its mark, that your other marks are continuing to line up on all your cam gears, and they are. The engine turned over nicely, there's no binding, so we can move on at this point. And before we go ahead to moving on to reinstalling the crank pulley, I want to get the car on the ground because in order to tighten that down, all 4 wheels need to be on the ground. So we're going to go ahead and throw our lower radiator hose on. I went with Mishimoto replacement ones to change out these old crusty OEM ones. Now we're going to go ahead and install our crank pulley. One thing I am going to do is I'm throwing a brand new crank pulley bolt in there, just because I've tried a couple different crank pulleys in the past, so this bolt's been on and off and torqued and retorqued a few times. It'd be the end of the world if that were to shear off for some unknown reason, just because it's being fatigued so much. So I'm going to feel better throwing just a brand new one in there. We're going to go ahead and tighten this aftermarket underdriven crank pulley down to 95 foot-pounds. And one easy way to do this, especially like on an aftermarket one like this that doesn't have holes in which you could lock it in place and torque against, just put your car in 5th gear and set the parking brake as tight as you can, and that should be enough to hold the engine in place. And one thing we've got to do is get this transmission filled back up. It was something I kind of forgot about. I don't plan on running this kind of no-name brand stuff in here long term, but just to get the transmission filled so we're not running gears completely dry. Alright, so now we need to go ahead and fill up on coolant. These earlier Subarus that use the long life coolant, this is a concentrated coolant. So we're going to go ahead and add this gallon of coolant here. This system takes about 8 quarts, so 4 quarts in this gallon, and then we'll top off with another gallon of distilled water. Alright, so at this point, it stops taking a whole lot more coolant. We're going to go ahead and start the car up, and then we'll be able to add the rest of our coolant and remaining water. Fingers crossed, because this is always the most nerve-wracking part about anytime you do anything involved on your car is the first time you have to go ahead and start it. All right guys, so with that, I'm super excited. It's been a long time since this car's been running. It's been a long time since I've been behind the wheel. And even just moving it back and forth there, it feels great to be back in the car again. You heard the brakes, they're a little loud and they bite like crazy. So the brakes need to get bed in, but they felt fine. I bled the cooling system about as good as I could get it for now. I didn't want to run the car for a super long amount of time because the oil in this is really old oil. If it's going to be sitting idling for a crazy amount of time, I'd like to have some fresh oil in there. Some other things that gave me a little bit of pause to think about. The valves seem really loud. They tick loud. I remember them always ticking loud, but I'm not sure I always remember them ticking this loud. And you could really hear it inside the car. That may just be because it's sitting. We get some fresh oil in it. That may quiet down. Also, the car's 20 years old at this point, and it's by far the oldest car I've been in a long time. And being that it's been really 6 years? Yeah, 6 years since I've driven this thing actually on the road, it may just be a louder car than what I'm used to. So yeah, I'm trying not to freak out about things that aren't problems yet. A good point to make with working on a car over a long period of time like this, I really have to quote, and I'm going to paraphrase here, another YouTuber. If you watch B is for Build, go check out his channel. But I know I was watching one of his episodes one time, and he said that when you get towards the end of a build, a lot of times you kind of slow down and you don't make any progress because you're nervous and you're paranoid about what could happen. Have you installed everything right? Is the car going to be okay? Is it going to drive right? And what you need to remind yourself is that the car does you no good just sitting here not being driven. Even if all I do is get it out on the road and I drive a couple miles and the engine blows up, it's still better than it sitting here doing nothing. So I'm an overthinker. Those are the times when my anxiety gets to me, is when I overthink things. So I'm just trying not to overthink things with this. The car started. I bled the system, I got heat inside the car, it's running good, no crazy noises, no cause for alarm as it is right now. So that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode. It's probably not gonna be super exciting. I think it's just gonna be a lot of sort of nitpicky maintenance type items, getting this ready to be on the road again, hopefully here in about a month's time. So I want to thank you guys all for watching, especially if you stuck out here till the end. I really appreciate it. If you're not subscribed already, please do me a favor, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give the video a like, and as always, feel free to leave a comment. I love hearing from you guys, so leave those comments below. Thanks.